Hi everyone, today we are sewing up the Poppie Pouch from Sewflo Patterns as part of the July Marathon Society event. This pattern comes with 3 different variations. It has the pouch, the wristlet, and the crossbody. I am sewing up the pouch today, which also comes in 3 different sizes. So you have a lot of great options with this pattern. This is a great pattern for practicing sewing your curves. You have a curved zipper installation and you also have top stitching on a curve. It's a great size for a toiletries bag. This is the smallest size, so there are 2 sizes that are bigger than this. You can use 1 solid piece for your exterior, or you can do the accent over the top. The accent can be done in vinyl or in cotton. It just uses a zipper, no other hardware, and it comes together really, really quickly. I would consider it to be a beginner-friendly pattern. Probably not your first pattern if you're new to making bags because of the curves, and this shape does get a little tricky to sew the side seams and to top stitch. But if you have done some straight topped pouches and you want to upgrade your skills, this is a really good pattern for doing that. So let's get going. All of my pattern pieces are cut and interfaced per the pattern instructions, and I've added an extra piece of stabilizer that is trimmed out of the seam allowance and fused to the back of my 2 main panels for some added structure. I'm using vinyl for my accent pieces, and I'm using waterproof canvas for my lining. The first thing that we need to do is apply our vinyl accent pieces to our exterior panels. If you are doing the cotton accent, then you will clip the curve and then fold that around your stabilizer piece. If you are using vinyl, then you can just attach it as it is. If you like, you can edge paint the lower edge. I have just singed mine with my lighter to reduce any fuzziness there, but I have not edge coated that. You can use clips to attach this, lining up the upper edge of your accent piece with the upper edge of your exterior panel, but I'm going to use double-sided tape to keep it secured. The first thing I'm going to do is mark my center with a very small snip at the top. That edge will be hidden within the top seam allowance. Do not place any snips at all on this lower edge, as that will be seen. Make sure that you are doing the shallower of the curves. You also need to mark the center of your exterior panels, same way, lining up the outside corner. Place a small snip. You can use your pen if you prefer. Then take your double-sided tape, and I'm going to run a strip around the upper and lower edges of my panel. I am going to be sewing this at 1/8 of an inch. My double-sided tape is 1/8 of an inch wide, but I'm actually going to place it further in from the edge than that because I'm going to top stitch this at 1/8 of an inch, and I want to make sure that I'm not sewing through my double-sided tape as much as I can avoid it. I have placed stabilizer on the back of my vinyl piece. You don't need to do that. I cut my pieces out before I realized that it wasn't necessary if you were using vinyl. Working with one piece at a time, match up the center mark on your vinyl accent piece or your cotton accent piece with the center mark on your exterior. I'm going to start with the top, match up the upper edge, and then line up the curve, pressing that down. And there should be an approximately equal distance at either end of your curved panel. You can double check that with a ruler. And when you're happy with that placement, remove the backing from the lower part of the curve. And then I'm just going to start in the center and press that down. Now, because we don't have a center mark here, you just can eyeball or use your ruler to make sure that you've kept it nice and straight going down the center. And that looks good. Do the same for the second panel. When you're happy with that placement, we need to baste the top curve and top stitch the lower curve. I'm going to do that all in one go. So I'm going to start at one end and baste along the upper edge, pivot, and top stitch down this lower curve, come across, and then back stitch to secure the vinyl accent to my exterior panel. I'm going to do that at the same time on both pieces. Something else you can do before you start is just double check that your edges are pretty well matched up between both sides of your exterior, and then I'll head over to the sewing machine. I am top stitching using a coordinating thread rather than a contrasting thread, and I'm going to be using the edge of my presser foot here as a guide to keep a consistent seam allowance for my top stitching. Pivot at the corner. Now this part will not be hidden, so I'm going to take it slowly as I need to. Just gradually go around that curve. Come back up to where I started, pivot again, back stitch to finish up, then repeat for the second exterior panel. When I am top stitching curves, something that I like to do is sew a couple of stitches at a time and then pivot so that I get a nice smooth stitch line as I go around the curve. This particular curve is quite gradual, so I am able to just pivot gently as I go without having to stop and start. But if you have a sharper curve, then you can stop every couple of stitches and manually readjust, keeping the edge of your presser foot that you're using as your guide lined up with the edge of your fabric that you were top stitching on. Trim your threads, and now we are ready to install our top zipper. I like to check the length of my zipper against the size of my exterior panel before I sew it in place. For this particular zipper installation, we will be turning the end, so I'm going to turn the end first. The instructions have you apply your tab and then turn the end. I find that I personally get a more accurate measurement if I turn the end first and then measure from the open end to where the tab will be. Open out your zipper tape about 1 inch and then fold one side over, straighten half to create a crease in your zipper tape, and then pull the coils up so that they sit snug against that line. You can then put some hand stitches in there to hold that in place, or you can use your lighter to singe the zipper tape, and that will melt it, and you can pinch it down and it essentially glues it to the main part of your zipper tape. The other option is to sew a few stitches there on your sewing machine. I like to do mine the quick way, so I am going to singe mine. Trim the fuzzies so that they don't catch a light. And I'm just going to melt the outside edge. And when it's melted a bit, press it down onto the tape using my pliers. And that will hold that 90-degree turn in place long enough to install my zipper. And do the same on the other side. Match up the fold, press it down, and fold it out. Double check that I'm happy with how well lined up they are. Place a clip, flip it over. And then I have both sides nicely folded. Now I need to measure where my zipper tape is going to go. I like my zipper tape to start about 3/4 of an inch from the outside edge. So I'm going to just place that roughly in position. Actually, I have the clip there, so I may as well just clip it for now. And this is a curve, so we're just going to kind of stretch the outside edge around to get an accurate line. And then come up to about 3/4 of an inch from the other side. And then using my chalk marker, because I've got black zipper tape, I'm going to place a mark. And I want it to be about the same distance beyond where the edge of my trim is, noting that I haven't yet placed my tab. So this may not be my exact final placement, but it's just giving me a good starting point. What I'm now going to do is place my pull. So looking at my zipper tape, I can see that the tooth on the right-hand side is further out, so that is the side I'm going to start on. Slide my pull on so that the teeth are sitting just inside my zipper pull, pinch it with my thumb and forefinger, take the other side of the zipper, slide it up till I feel it meet with the zipper teeth that are inside the zipper pull, pull down from the right side until I see the teeth approximately meet up and feel them click, and push from the back of that zipper pull. And because the zipper tooth that I started on is still further out, I know that I've got my teeth lined up and there are no gaps. Slide that on, and then I'm going to cut my zipper tape here at the point that we marked. I like to cinch the end here too so that I don't get any fraying. I'm going to take my zipper tab, I'm going to fold it in half, increase that, and then I'm going to fold one end in to meet that crease in the center. And now what we're going to do is take the unfolded end and we're going to line it up. We're going to take that over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along here at 1/4 inch. So the zipper tab is right sides down with our zipper teeth with the folded edge facing away from the raw edge of the zipper. Using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we are going to sew along the end of this zipper, sewing the raw edge of the zipper tab to the closed end of the zipper. Take care as you go over the zipper teeth and backstitch at the other end. And what we're now going to do is fold the zipper tab around over that raw edge of the zipper so that the fold that we made at the beginning is here on the back. And then we can top stitch that tab to fully enclose the raw end. I'm going to be top stitching using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And when I start my stitches, I'm going to start them parallel to my zipper tape, pivot, and then sew across the end so that I can backstitch here at the side and it will be hidden in the zipper seam allowance rather than being seen from the top of my pouch. It's also a good time to double check that you have placed your zipper pull before you top stitch this tab. Check that it's caught the tab on the back and we're good. Trim your tab down so that the edges of the tab line up with the edges of your zipper, making sure you're not cutting through any of your stitches. Then slide the pull all the way to one end and line up the zipper coils as they turn out with the flat edge of your tab and mark the center of your zipper tape. I like to mark my zipper tape by placing a small snip at the fold, but if you prefer not to snip into your zipper tape, you can use an erasable pen or your chalk marker to mark the center. Take your double-sided tape and you're going to place it from one end of your exterior panel all the way around that upper curved edge to the other side. Then working with one side at a time, you can choose which side you wish to be the front of your pouch. We are going to line up the center of our zipper tape with the center on our exterior panel. Press it down at the center and then work our way out to the edge. And you just want to gently curve your zipper tape by pulling on it slightly as it comes around the curve. And it'll come up a little here as you shape it, and that is fine. Work towards the other end also. Just letting your pull out of the way can help you to get that gradual curve. And you should have approximately the same distance from the coil to the outside edge as you do from the tab end to the outside edge. And what we're now going to do is baste this zipper in place just where the zipper is. So not sewing this part where your tape is. If that tape is bothering you, you can always remove that. If you don't like to use tape at all, then you can use clips to secure that in place. I'm just going to baste this at 1/8 inch with a longer stitch length, making sure that my zipper teeth are right sides down with my exterior panel. So right now I can see the back of my zipper tape. Trim your threads and then take one of your lining pieces. This is the lining piece that I will be placing on the inside front of my puppy pouch. And I'm going to place double-sided tape along the upper curve of that piece as well. Remove the backing from that double-sided tape, and then you're going to line up the center mark of your lining piece with the center mark of your exterior and your zipper, and press it down towards the edge, and the outside edge should be lining up. Slide your zipper pull out of the way to get the placement right. Make sure that you're pressing it down well around the zipper teeth and around your tab. And if it's pulling away a little, you can add extra clips on top, and that will help with any shifting. So I have here the right side of my exterior front, my zipper tape that is basted in place to be teeth side down on top of my exterior, and then my front lining panel is right sides together with my exterior. I'm going to sew from one end all the way to the other end using a 5/16 inch seam allowance. You can use 3/8 inch if you prefer. If you are using a narrower zipper tape, you can use 1/4 inch. My preferred seam allowance for zippers is 5/16 inch. So I'm going to sew from one end to the other, back stitching and taking care as I go around the curve to make sure that I've got a nice even seam line so that I have a nice smooth zipper on my finished bag. I've switched over to my zipper foot and I'm using a shorter stitch length so that I can get a nice gradual curve. Sewing through my lining, my zipper tape, and my exterior. When I come up to the zipper teeth here, I can use a hump jumper to help me get over the bulk. My zipper pull is currently here out of the way, and as I come close, I will slide it back up to the other end. My zipper is mostly open to start with, as that makes the zipper tape a little more flexible, but I'll need to close it up when I come to the other end. So now sliding my pull up to the other end and continue along. Back stitching at the other end. Trim your threads, and we now need to turn the first side of the zipper out. Often when I sew a curve like this, I put snips in the curve itself so that when I fold it out, I get a nice smooth shape. This is a fairly gradual curve, so I don't think I need to do the snips. However, this vinyl here is making it kind of bulky. So what I am going to do is just snip back some of that bulk. I have my basting stitches in here, so I am going to have to remove the basting stitches. And then what I'm going to do is trim back the exterior and the vinyl, leaving my zipper tape intact and leaving my lining intact. So I'm going to grab my seam ripper and I'm just going to remove the basting stitches. I've removed all of those basting stitches, so now I'm going to pull my exterior away from my zipper tape, and I'm just going to trim some of the bulk here, making sure that I'm trimming through just my vinyl and my exterior. I am not trimming your zipper tape. I often put snips in my zipper tape, but you don't ever want to cut long ways along your zipper tape. Now we can turn this out and smooth that first side out. I like to take some clips and just clip it at the side, and then we can attach the second side of the zipper. If you like, you can top stitch this side first before you top stitch the second side, especially if it's the front of your bag and you are concerned about how your top stitching is going to look when you're top stitching on the curve. It is easier to do it before you attach the second side. Take your exterior panel for the other side of your pouch, remove the backing from the double-sided tape, and then you're going to line up the center mark on that exterior panel with the center mark on your zipper. And you want to press it down all the way to the edge. And before we baste it in place, you want to make sure that our zipper placement is approximately even. So when we line up the bottom, we want that zipper to be in the right position on the second side of our pouch. I'm going to just clip that at the end. Take a good look to make sure that it is even. You can also measure both sides to make sure that it matches up. And you can also just check the distance on either side of your accent to make sure that it looks good and pretty even. I'm happy with that. I'm going to place clips to keep that up against the curve, and then I'm going to baste that. I am going to be removing these basting stitches the same way as I did on the first side, but I still want to put the basting stitches there to get the correct positioning and shape of that zipper. So I'm going to baste along here at 1/8 of an inch. Using a longer stitch length, not back stitching, sewing through the zipper tape, right sides down on the right side of my second exterior panel. Slide the zipper pull out of the way. Take your second lining piece and place double-sided tape along the upper curved edge of that one also. Oh, I haven't marked the center yet, so I've got to do that too. Now we're going to line up the center mark on the second lining side with the center of the second side of the zipper and press it down, matching up the curve and the outside edges. At the moment, the zipper and the lining here, they look like a little bunched up, but that's okay. The reason that they're like that is because when we finish the pouch and we pop the zipper out and it's got that convex shape, it will be nice and smooth. But right now, we've crammed it into this tighter spot, so that's why it seems like it's a little bunched up here. But on the finished bag, that is going to be just fine. Lining up the center, press it down all the way along, press it down around the zipper teeth, lining up the outside edge and the upper curve, press it down. Make sure that that zipper is where it should be. It was just a little longer here, so it's still in the right spot. Opening the zipper out can make it a little easier. Again, because the zipper tape is more flexible when it is open, because the rigidity of the tape comes from the coils. And when the coils are interlocked, when the zipper is closed, it makes it a lot stiffer. And then place clips over the top of that. Now I'm going to sew the second side at 5/16 of an inch, the same way as I did the first side, sewing through the lining, the zipper tape tucked in here, hard to see, which is the wrong side facing the lining, right side facing my exterior, back stitching at the beginning and at the end, and sewing all the way along. For the back side, I am starting with my zipper closed just to about here as I sew up partway around the curve, which is about 1/3 or 1/4 of the way along the upper part of the bag, and then I will slide the zipper pull back. I'll take care as I get over that tab to make sure that I don't skip any stitches. I have my hump jumper handy if I need it. A stiletto can also help that material to hug tightly around the tab. My pull is here, so I'm going to slide it back, and I can pull the first part out of the way. Make sure that I'm not actually pulling my zipper tape, but it is basted in place so that it won't shift. I'm just going to push my lining up to the coils here to make sure that I don't get any gaps. Don't have my stiletto handy, that is what I would usually use, but anything that's a little pokey will work. You can also backstitch there to further reinforce that high stress point where the zipper pull will be on your closed bag. Just skipped a little as it came down, so I'm just going to go back and I'm going to use my hump jumper. Just hopped off those zipper teeth a little. There we go. Check that I'm happy with the consistency of that seam allowance. And then the same way as I did on the first side, I am going to remove the basting stitches where I have secured my zipper tape to my exterior so that I can trim back the bulk where that vinyl is. If you have done a cotton trim, you probably don't need to do that. But with mine being a somewhat thicker marine vinyl, I am going to trim that back. It's easier to do if I remove the double-sided tape too. Trim back the exterior within the seam allowance where the vinyl overlay is. With that bulk trimmed back on both sides, I'm going to pop the other side of my Poppie Pouch out. Roll that zipper a little. And then before I top stitch, I just want to take a look to make sure that I am happy with my zipper, that it is nice and smooth. that the spacing is even on either side of the zipper teeth. And now I'm going to top stitch my zipper. When you top stitch this zipper, you have a choice of either top stitching the lining and the exterior together, but starting your top stitching about 3/4 of an inch in from the edge, sewing along here and stopping 3/4 of an inch from the other edge, and that will help to keep the lining out of the way, but you will still be able to get nice neat corners. Alternatively, you can do it the way it is written in the instructions, and that is to top stitch through just your exterior. You can do that by turning your bag kind of back inside out, making sure that the lining seam allowance is tucked beneath the exterior and sewing down here all the way from one edge to the other. It does get a little tricky. You just need to manipulate the pouch a little under your presser foot. Keep it pressed down. Keep the lining out of the way, and you're just sewing along this edge from one end to the other. If you struggle with that, then top stitching from here to here, keeping the lining tucked under your exterior, can be a little bit of an easier way to do it. I think I'm going to do mine today sewing through the lining as well as the exterior. So I'm going to start my top stitching about 3/8 of an inch beyond where my vinyl accent is. I'm going to start it with long tails. I am not going to backstitch. I'm going to sew along the curve here and finish up 3/8 of an inch beyond the zipper teeth on this side, again with long tails, and then I will pull the long tails through to the inside here and knot those off. I'll do that on both sides. I like to press my exterior before I top stitch so that it's got a nice crease there and helps it stay in position when I am sewing. You can also put double-sided tape if you don't have any trouble sewing through it, just within your seam allowance, and then press that down to keep everything in position. Placing a clip here at the bottom of your pouch can help to keep the lining and the exterior pulled back from the zipper. And we're just going to sew starting about 3/4 of an inch from the end. And as we sew, we are going to reposition our zipper so that we can get a consistent stitch line for our top stitching. And because of the curved shape, sometimes the pouch kind of wants to pull in on itself, so we just have to be mindful of that and reposition as needed. We're not back stitching. I'm going to take long tails and pull those through to the inside. You can increase your tension if you need to get a nice even stitch with the knot buried between your layers. When you have more layers, often you need a greater tension to get that knot to sit in the middle rather than on the bottom of your material. It needs more tension just to pull the knot within the layers. When I come about 1/3 of the way up, I'm just going to slide my zipper pull back, smooth it out, and continue along. Take care as I come off the edge of the vinyl accent piece and my zipper teeth so I don't skip any stitches, and I want an even spacing between the edge of my top stitching and the edge of my pouch. And then I will take it off the machine with long tails, and then I'm going to pull those threads through to the inside gently. You don't want those to snap. Using the blunt end of a needle can help. If you're having trouble pulling them through, then you can use a needle to poke them through rather than risk snapping those threads. You need to pull through the top thread and the bobbin thread. And then you're just going to knot those together, and you're going to do the same thing at the other end of the top stitching, and then we will repeat for the second side. Again, you want it to be secure but not too tight. You don't want to snap those threads. If you snap those threads, then you will have to unpick a few stitches and then treat it as you would if you had run out of your bobbin thread. And I'll pop a link to my video on that quick fix for you. Once you've top stitched both sides of that zipper, we need to close up the side and bottom seams of our Poppie Pouch. We're going to turn the bag so that it is back inside out. And because of the curve, it's going to sit with the zipper in towards your lining side. I'm going to smooth it out, and then starting with the exterior, I'm going to clip along the bottom and the sides. And then when I come up to this point here where the exterior and the lining meet, it doesn't quite want to sit flat. If you have not top stitched your lining, you'll be able to pull it out a little bit more. If you've stopped your top stitching just shy of the side seam, then you're just going to pop it up a little to get it to sit nice and smooth. The important thing is that the fold of your exterior where it joins to your lining is matching up. I like to put a staple in there. You can use clips. You can even baste that before you sew the rest of your exterior to make sure that it is well lined up. I'm going to place the clip right at that point, and then a clip on either side. Then I will remove that center clip and I will put a staple. My staple is going through just my exterior, just below that fold, within that seam allowance. And that is just going to help keep that corner lined up. Do the same on the other side. So here we have the seam allowance is pointed towards the exterior. And when we're sewing, we're going to be popping this out so that we can sew past here without catching any of this lining fold. But because of the curved shape of the zipper, we need to work sometimes not in a straight line in order to get a straight line on our finished pouch. So I'm going to continue clipping all the way around the outside here and the lining, and I'm also going to mark an opening in the bottom of my pouch. That will be my turning hole. I've got about 2 inches on either side, leaving about a 3.5 inch opening in the middle. Lining up all of the edges and the corners. When we sew around the outside of this pouch, because the lining piece is cut from the same pattern piece as the exterior, we need to taper our seam allowance. You can taper your lining piece before you sew by angling in the sides and removing some of the length and the width at the bottom here. The instructions have you taper your seam allowance, so that is the way that I'm going to do it. So we're going to be sewing around the outside with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, sewing the side seam and the bottom seam. We'll box the corners at the end. We're also going to sew the side seams here and along the bottom. When we get past the join between the exterior and the lining, we're going to go from a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, do the bottom section at 1/2 inch, and then start at 1/2 inch on this side and taper back to 3/8 of an inch to meet up with where we started on this side. You can start at the bottom and work your way around, or you can sew your exterior and then sew your lining separately. When I am stopping and starting my stitches at the opening, I like to back stitch from about 1/2 inch further out from where my opening will be, so that my thread tails will be hidden rather than have loose stitches at the edges of that opening. I also back stitch at either side of my boxed corners. I'm going to start at the bottom. If you adjusted your tension when you were top stitching, make sure that you set it back to your usual tension for finishing sewing your seams. I'm going to sew forward a few stitches, then back stitch up to the mark that I made for the opening in my lining that I'll turn my pouch out through. Come up to that boxed corner, back stitch. You can leave your threads here and just come straight across. Some people even like to pull that tight when they go over their boxed corner. Starting at 1/2 inch here, but then we'll be tapering up to 3/8 of an inch as we get close to the join between the lining and the exterior. When we come up here, we're going to be pulling this corner out. You may find that it is easier to do that with your zipper foot. I've got my regular foot on right now. I may end up needing to change it as we get close. So just gradually tapering that lining. I can feel my zipper here, so it may get a little tricky to get past. I've got my hump jumper, pop that underneath. And I want to make sure that this is nice and flat. So it's going to be kind of angled at that corner there because of the angle at the top of the bag. And then I'm going to pivot slightly. And now I'm going to be sewing straight down this edge at 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to backstitch a little to reinforce that top seam. Be careful with my staple there. Now I'm sewing straight down here, not tapering because this is the exterior. Backstitch at this exterior boxed corner. Come across to the other side. Sew straight along the bottom using 3/8 of an inch. Holding the pouch up at the side here can help you to keep the layers lined up, especially as you come up to that curved edge of the bag. So we're going to sew up to the line where you have joined your lining to your exterior, and then we will be pivoting. I have a staple there, so I'm just going to be very careful. I'm just going to pull it out a little. You want to make sure that the lining and the exterior are smoothed out so that you don't catch that corner, so you don't get that pinched in corner. So I'm just pulling this here. You can see it's kind of angled, but it needs to be to get it to be nice and smooth. It'll be straight when we are all finished. So sewing up to that stitch line, I'm going to back stitch. And I'm going to be pivoting to go straight down this side. And I will be increasing my seam allowance back up to 1/2 inch towards the bottom, so that I have that tapered fit of my lining that will help it to fit nice and snugly inside my exterior. Then sewing the last section, back stitching. I'm going to sew up to the mark. And then I will backstitch away from the opening and secure my threads here so that the tails here and here are not in the opening of my pouch. Trim back those threads. You can choose to trim these ones between your boxed corners, or when you fold those up, you can just make sure they're pulled to the inside. I often find that they sneak their way through that seam, so I prefer to trim those. We're also going to remove the staples that we placed at our side seam, and then we will be ready to box our corners. When we're lining up our boxed corners, the bottom seam and the side seam should match up in the middle. And if your seam allowance was consistent between the bottom and the side, then your corners should sit nice and flat. You can choose to open out that seam allowance, or you can push it to one side and then the other side. Place some clips. I like to place the clip on the angled side there also. And that will help it to sit nice and flat when I'm sewing it. I'm going to clip all 4 corners. This should be a nice straight line. That is how you know that you will have a flat base on your bag. We now need to box these corners. We'll be boxing the exterior corners at 3/8 of an inch. For the lining corners, if you box them at 1/2 inch, you're going to end up with a depth on your lining that is the same as the depth on your exterior. So in order to have a depth of my bag that is less than the depth of my exterior, which will then allow my lining to tuck nicely inside the exterior corners, I am going to box mine just shy of 1/2 inch, and that will make it ever so slightly narrower than my exterior, but the height of my lining piece will still be reduced compared to the height of my exterior so that it won't be bunchy. If you like, once you have sewn those box corners, you can pin those to each other so that your lining will remain tightly down inside of your bag. It can make it a little trickier to close up the turning hole, so that is optional whether you want to do that or not. So I'm going to box the 2 exteriors at 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to box the 2 linings just shy of 1/2 inch. Again, the curved shape can make it a little tricky to get this under your presser foot, so just scrunch your bag down as you need to. You want to make sure that you're sewing in a straight line at the moment. This part of your pouch is the flat base of your bag, so you want to make sure you're sewing in a straight line. If you have to pivot when you are sewing this boxed corner, then there are adjustments that need to be made somewhere. Back stitching at the beginning and sewing straight across. Now sewing the lining using a seam allowance just shy of 1/2 inch. And before we turn our Poppie Pouch out, if you wish, you can pin your lining corner to your exterior corner, matching up the same side. And the way that you would do that is folding the side seams over the top of each other and matching up your boxed corners. You're going to line up the center seam, and what you would do is just sew these together within the seam allowance. You're not going to sew them at this line. That's going to make the lining too tight inside of your exterior, and it's going to pull the exterior corners in a little bit. They're going to roll. But if you sew it about 1/4 of an inch or even 1/8 of an inch at this edge, making sure that your centers are lined up, then you are going to have a lining that is pinned inside of your exterior so that it won't come up, which is particularly helpful if you haven't top stitched your lining at the zipper. But note that it does make it slightly harder to close up the bottom turning hole in your finished pouch. I'm not going to pin my lining, so I'm going to trim my threads and then I will turn my bag out. I have trimmed all those threads. Before I turn this out, I'm just going to crease my lining where the opening is so that I can see where I'm going to be closing that up and make sure that I've got the correct seam allowance when I am closing up that bottom seam, which we can close either using a ladder stitch or you can close it on your sewing machine. I can now turn my pouch out. Now it is a little tricky with the bulk of that vinyl accent, so we're just going to do our best. Take your time. Once you've got your exterior turned out, poke the corners out and then go to the ends of your zipper, poke that corner out also. And I like to tuck my lining in before I've closed it up to make sure that I am happy with the shape. Smooth the corners out a bit more. If you are finding your corners are a little bulky, then you can trim back the seam allowance a little. If you're happy with that shape, then you can pull your lining back out and close that up. If you pull it taut, it'll fold back on that memory crease that we made, and then you can clip along there and sew it closed with your sewing machine, or using a ladder stitch. I have used waterproof canvas for my lining, which I find is a little trickier to ladder stitch, so I am going to use my sewing machine to sew that closed, even though that's going to leave that little bit of a ridge there. I'll just sew as close as I can to that seam allowance using a coordinating thread, and that will be the last thing we need to do. I like to start about 3/4 of an inch beyond my opening, and then I will finish 3/4 of an inch beyond it at the other end to make sure that I am fully closing up the lining. And sewing as close to the edge as I can while making sure that I am catching both sides of that fold. On a bigger bag, you can put your turning hole in the side seam rather than the bottom seam, which can be a great way to disguise that ridge if you're closing it up using your sewing machine. This pouch I felt was a little too small to do that. You need to have enough space, obviously, in your side seam to be able to turn out the bulk of your bag, but that is another good option if you don't like the ridge in the bottom of your bag, but you don't want to hand sew your lining closed. I'm going to pull those threads tight and then trim them or melt them with my thread zapper, and then we will be all done. Tuck that lining in and down into your corners, and then you're all finished. This patch came together really quickly. It's a really good pattern for practicing sewing your curved top stitching and also a curved zipper installation, which I know is something that can be a little bit tricky to get without any waves. We've got nice neat corners, nice flat bottom on this bag. It comes in 3 different sizes for the pouch, but there is also the wristlet version and the crossbody version. I'll make sure the links to purchase the pattern if you're interested are in the video description, and be sure to check out the other videos that are part of this month's Marathon Sewciety sew along for the Poppie Pouch, wristlet, and crossbody bag. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.